All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. Big news out of the transfer portal as Carson Beck commits to and signs with the Miami Hurricanes. Announced yesterday that he was going to enter the transfer portal and not go to the NFL, obviously leaving Georgia. Miami, always the favorite in this. It sounded like Ohio State, Texas Tech were maybe just put out there to, I don't even really know how much contact there was with those schools, maybe just to, avoid any kind of tampering stuff, but everyone's tampering right now, so who even cares? I never thought that Ohio State or Texas Tech had a real shot here. Miami ends up landing their guy. We don't do a lot of portal commits. We don't do a lot of news around stuff like that, but when it is the number one player, when it is with a program that we've done a lot of coverage on this year, we've got a lot of you that have asked, who've commented on our Texas and Ohio State previews asking, what about your thoughts on Carson Beck to Miami? When there was that much of a question, I got a few questions on Twitter about it saying, hey, are you going to put out a video? So here we are. Here's some thoughts. As I always try and do, if you're new to the channel, I don't love Miami. I'm very frank about that. I'm a Florida State guy, but I do try to be very unbiased and try and give a very intelligent, sometimes you may disagree with that, opinion that is not clouded by the rivalry. I may not like a program, but I'm going to be pretty straightforward on what I think here. Obviously, this is huge for Miami, and not just because of Beck, but as one insider says, it sounds like they may have more coming. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But there are some big-time pros that come with this. Obviously, his experience is at the top of that list. His next start will be his 40th game. His first 39 games against SEC-type competition. Now, not all SEC teams, but most of them certainly have been. And then his next one will be against a team that's currently in the national championship in Notre Dame. You need that kind of experience. You are bringing that in a massive way. Your option, if it wasn't him, was somebody else in the portal or Emory, who I know you guys don't want Miami to go with. And so it makes a lot of sense to go get a guy with a ton of experience. His ceiling is a huge pro. He's got a ton of success that we can point to. If you look back just a year ago in 2023, threw for 3,941 yards, a 72% completion percentage. He had 24 touchdowns to 6 picks. Obviously, a guy who can be very successful. He can make every single throw. He can drop absolute darts and hit dimes after, under pressure. It doesn't matter. This guy can do it all, and his ceiling is very high. Are there cons to this pickup? There probably are cons too. Let's talk about that in just a moment. But what I think this does big picture for Miami is it just raises their floor a ton, right? It raises the ceiling as well, but it takes them from with Emory starting, who knows how that goes? It takes them from are we a 6-7 win team to Miami should now comfortably win another 8 or 9 games. And then if you get plus level play out of him, you can get to that 10-11 marker, right? Am I going to say they're going to go 12-0 with Carson Beck? No, I'm not willing to buy that just yet. But it takes you from that, I'm doubtful about some of these matchups to, we should win a lot of games in 2025 with Carson Beck. It should raise that floor quite a bit. Now, some cons. He's coming off an injury. Like, we can call a spade a spade. Who knows exactly what he will look like, what his throwing motion will look like, how good he is coming off of a major injury and surgery to a throwing arm. That's a big deal. That is not nothing. Do I expect him to come back and probably play at a similar level? Absolutely. Are some guys never the same after surgery? Absolutely. I think both can be true. I expect him to come back and look relatively similar, but until you see it, until you see how the recovery goes, that is a question mark. Another question mark is that he did regress this year. Let's be very honest. There's a reason when I talked about his ceiling, I went back to 2023 and I didn't use his 2024 stats. Can you look at me, the Florida State guy that's backing up Carson Beck, newest Miami Hurricane. But he did regress this year. And if you're looking at questions or you're looking at cons, he had 12 interceptions this year where he only had 6 in 2023. His completion percentage was down 8%. He threw for less yards per attempt. He threw for less air yards per attempt. He threw for less yards per completion. Every statistical category was down this year. Now, to be somewhat fair to him, we'll back him up a little bit. Drops were a problem at UGA this year. They led the country in drops. And let's be fair, his weapons were not as good in 24 as they were in 23. in talking with some UGA folks, which we do quite often. If you subscribe to the channel and you check out some of our other content, we get UGA folks on all the time. Shout out to guy Graham Coffee at Dog Central. But in chatting with some UGA folks, it was a big struggle to figure out this year whether or not Carson was regressing or whether or not the guys around him just weren't as good. And so he felt like he had to overcompensate to make up for that. There's really no way to know that, right? You're not going to go up and ask him, hey, were you just not as good? Or did you just feel like you had to do too much because your weapons were terrible? So there's no way to know that. But if we're being honest, it's probably a little bit of both, right? It's hard to keep the level of play that he was at in 2023. So a slight regression wouldn't surprise anyone. But at the same time, if he was forcing the issue at times because his weapons weren't as good or because guys were dropping the ball more, then that would explain a little bit more of it as well. It's probably a bit of both. And if you're a Miami fan, you have to hope that he reverts back to a little bit more of what he was in 23 as opposed to the regression that we saw in 2024. Again, at the end of the day, I think he's a guy who can be really, really good if you surround him with elite talent. He can make every throw you want him to make. Like I said earlier, he can drop absolute dimes. He's got a different skill set than Ward. I certainly don't think that he's going to have the impact that Ward did. I don't necessarily think that Carson Beck, I wouldn't put money on him being in New York City next year as a Heisman Trophy finalist, but I still think he can be really good. And he raises the floor a ton. If Emory was your 2025 quarterback, the season could certainly go south pretty quickly. This should mitigate that risk. Some folks way smarter than I am think that he struggled somewhat to look off defenders or read coverages. That's something he will need to get better at this year. That's something that he will need to improve on because I do think that the tape is out on him now, right? Like there's enough film to kind of know what his strengths and weaknesses are. Here's the question for Miami, though. How do you feel about the talent that's around Beck right now? Because to me, you've got two versions of Beck. You've got version number one of Beck that has elite talent around him and wins just about every single game, right? Like their only loss in 2023 was by 3 points to an Alabama team in the SEC championship. When he's got great talent around him, he's phenomenal. When the talent is not as elite, which let's not kid ourselves. Georgia's talent this year was still really, really good. Was it 2023 level? Absolutely not. Was it still one of the best in the country? Absolutely. So let's not pretend that Georgia in 2023 was, a middling Big 12 team or a middling ACC team. No, they were still really, really good this year. How do you feel about the talent that's around Beck? Restrepo gone, Horton to Bama, Martinez gone, Jacoby George to the NFL. Now, Trader and Nikar, young guys that they're very talented and they're excited about. They got Daniels from LSU. There is certainly talent there. I'm not trying to say that there's none. But is there a true number one that's about to emerge? Well, 247 sports analyst Brad Crawford tweeted, if Miami can land Carson Beck, this was yesterday, I'd expect an elite wide receiver to leave his current situation during the spring portal cycle and link up with the Canes. This is, again, a 247 sports analyst. Obviously, they are very big in recruiting there at 247. And so I don't know specifically who Brad Crawford has in mind there. I don't know if he has anyone in mind or if he's literally just saying out loud, hey, if Beck goes there, maybe somebody else reconsiders their situation and leaves too. And he doesn't really have a player in mind. But think about some of the big names in college football right now. Would they leave their situation, right? Would a Jeremiah Smith, who obviously had ties to South Florida, would he leave? Would a Zachariah Branch, who just committed to Georgia, would he leave, right? After now finding out who Miami's quarterback is going to be, would he maybe leave? Casey Concepcion, who was just in the portal, would he consider it? There's some really good wide receivers, young guys at Bama right now. There's some really good wide receivers right now at Clemson that are very elite. Would they leave? Or maybe any one of the wide receivers that they were in on and ended up signing somewhere else in this 2025 class. I don't have any info. This isn't me telling you, oh, it's one of those guys I just mentioned or somebody close to one of those guys. I have no clue. I'm just naming some of the top wide receivers that I think will be playing college football in 2025. Any idea who that might be? No clue. Brad Crawford, maybe over at 247 Sports, he seems to think he knows or expects maybe someone in that list to jump ship and go down to Miami in the spring window. all in all, I do think this is a big pickup for Miami. It takes their floor up by at least 2 games to me. They do still have big questions. The big questions for Miami now are, can they pick up that elite wide receiver that Brad is talking about? Or can one emerge? Can Daniels be that guy? Can Trader be that guy? Who is that true number one to really take them to the next level? And number two, if the defense improves like it needs to, that will be my biggest question answered, right? That will be what I need to see. Because this year, let's be very frank, Miami fans, I think you have said this more than I have. This isn't just me being a hater. Last year, I think Miami wasted Cam Ward because the defense was absolutely atrocious. Now, they still got to 10 wins. They still made a good bowl game. They still beat both their rivals. I get it. They did all those things. However, they wasted Cam Ward. And they can't do that again, right? 10 wins is still phenomenal. It's progress from where Mario was the first 2 years. I'm not crapping on the 2 wins, but you had a Heisman Trophy candidate, and the defense was so terrible that you couldn't hold a lead against Syracuse, Georgia Tech, whatever. So I think those are things that's the bigger question to me. But with Beck there, you've at least solidified the foundation. You've solidified the floor. They're not going 6-6, right? With Emory, you might have gone 7-5. With Beck, I think you're probably looking at a worst case scenario of 8-4, 9-3. Now, your best case still might just be 10-2, right? But 10-2 probably gets you into the ACC championship. If you go 10-2, you're probably thinking one of those losses might come to Notre Dame. So you're losing 1 game in conference. Yeah, you're going to the ACC championship with a chance to play your way in. If I was to offer any Miami fan right now 10-2 with one of those losses coming out of conference, you'd take it in a heartbeat. Because if you win the ACC championship, you're in. And so, yeah, I think this is a good move for Miami. Does it mean they're definitely going 10-2? No. They've got a lot more to figure out. I like some of the transfers they've taken on defense. I don't like some of the transfers they've taken in the secondary. But how does it all shake out? Where's it up going? What are your thoughts overall? Am I a little too harsh on this? Am I a little too fair to Miami? I think this is a pickup that helps them, but it certainly isn't a pickup that's to the level of a Cam Ward, in my opinion, right? You can hate that. You can agree with that. You can disagree. It doesn't matter to me. That's my take. Some of you asked for it. The rest of you clicked on it to watch it. And so I'd love to hear yours down in the comments. We will see what Miami ends up doing through the rest of this cycle and then in the spring too, to see if Brad's prediction ends up being correct. I appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon here on College Football Addiction.